Welcome everyone. Strategic management versus operational management. Just for the moment, I'd like to take you back in time. I'd like you to imagine it's about 1,000 years ago and you live in a village. And your village relies on crops and hunted deer to survive. But it's been a hard winter. You're a bit short of the crops. And you haven't caught many deer recently. The village is hungry, and so are your family. So as a village, you decide to go and hunt some deer. So out you head as a team into the melting snow, into the landscape that you know, looking for some deer. And after a few hours, your hunting party spots a deer in the distance. Now, catching a deer is not a one-person task. You have to work as a team. You've worked out how to do it over the years, but you've got to be careful, because if you don't work as a team and one of you gets it wrong, you'll spook the deer and it will be away and you'll lose your chance. And if you miss it, you'll have to spend more time in that snow looking for the deer. So there you are. Just imagine yourself there now. You're behind some bushes looking for the deer. And just on your right, you catch sight of a rabbit. And that rabbit is about 6 feet away. And it has not seen you. Now, here's the question. Given that you know you could catch that rabbit and feed your family, but if you do, you'll spook the deer. The question that echoes down the centuries as far as I'm concerned is, do you go for the rabbit or do you go for the deer? You see, I think there's a lot of nonsense talked about strategy. There's this belief going around that, the world's changed, internet technology is coming around, nothing will be the same again. All this credit crunch means, change is so much more fast and everything. Some people think that how we manage strategy has fundamentally changed. I don't think so. I think the techniques of strategy, some of them have changed, but the fundamental principles that I'm going to talk about tonight, I'm going to get across to you, there's really only, I think, 4 that make up strategy, are still there and are persistent. Now, don't get me wrong, we've been through some pretty interesting times in the past 18 months, 2 years, I'm sure. And with the global economy, it connects us more. China's become a rising power that it wasn't before. The web helps us collaborate and talk together and connects us in a way that's unimaginable before. I was at a conference at the weekend. Somebody was tweeting. There were 100 in the room. There were 12,000 listening to the tweets on the other end. It's amazing, isn't it? And the speed at which we introduce new products and new products get competitors come and threaten us has changed. And how we catch deer and rabbits has changed. But in essence, the what of strategy, the way we think about strategy, I don't think that's changed. Now, talking to Michael earlier, he's the gentleman who invited me, thank you, Michael. He suggested there was a slide that would help you as accountants understand how strategy fits in the thinking of a board. I actually have slipped this slide in only 20 minutes beforehand. It's the most complicated slide of the whole of this evening, and I'm going to briefly talk you through it, and then I'll move on to definitions of strategy for you, but this places it in a context. And I should give you a warning about this slide. It's only got 4 things on it, really. It looks more complicated than that. Sometimes I include it in a pack of 12 that I'm presenting to a management team or executive group for about an hour, and they'll spend 45 minutes on this one slide. Now, this slide has 4 pieces. It's actually about what does a board do? What does the board of any organization have to concentrate on? It comes from a guy called Bob Garrett. The book is called The Fish Rots from the Head, and on my website you'll find, in the material you'll find a link to the website, and my website there'll be links to all the material I talked to you about tonight. So the top left-hand side says we have to be accountable. We have to be accountable for legislators, to regulators. We have to get our accounts in on time. We have to do the basics. That is not strategy. That's doing the basics. It's just being a company. We have to create values, purpose, direction, climate, culture, policy formulation. What are we dealing with here? Where do we want to go? What do we want to be? Then we have to think about where we are in the market, set direction, and then the 4th part is make sure it's happening. And Bob Garrett says that those are the only 4 things any board ever needs to do. One of the problems is they get stuck in some of those holes, and they don't move around them, because they should be moving around them as a cycle. So some boards get stuck in regulation, possibly rightly, because they need to fix it. Some boards get stuck in operations. If you get stuck in strategy and don't do the operations, you're not grounded. And I use this as a model, and I simply ask organizations or a management team, marks out of 10, how well do you do each of these? And that promotes at least a 45-minute conversation often. Because that, what happens at the top echoes down the organization. Now, I'm going to particularly concentrate on the policy formulation, strategic thinking through to operational management pieces today. As I said, this is a detailed slide. There's really only 4 messages in there, which is that the board should cycle round that. One of my favorite writers on strategy is a guy called Henry Mintzberg. A couple of books of his, Strategy Safari, is excellent. There's another one called Tracking Strategy. And this is a quote from Tracking Strategies. He looked at strategies of organizations over 10 to 20 years, 10 organizations, looking for consistent patterns. And he suggested that strategy formulation can fruitfully be thought of, be viewed as the interplay between that dynamic environment out there and the bureaucratic momentum of the organization. I don't read too much into bureaucratic, except to say that you are trying to get consistency, with the role of leadership to mediate between the two. And there we have a tension immediately. And I have a belief that strategy is always about tension. If I come across a strategy in an organization, I cannot find the tension, I don't believe I've found it. Because the tension here is between we want consistent processes, but at the same time, the outside world changes. And you have to mediate between the two. Now, he wrote that as strategy formulation. But I think there's another one which is about strategy implementation. And strategy implementation can fruitfully be viewed as a persistent pattern of behavior within an organization to create and maintain that bureaucratic momentum. And I would occasionally say to stop and restart, to change its direction, so you get a different momentum. With leadership responsible for monitoring that outside environment. Is it still snowing? Can we go and chase some deer? Can we do some crops? And learning as the strategy is executed. So that basically gives you the structure for tonight. There are 4 principles I'm going to be talking about in 4 pieces. The first one is strategy as connection to the landscape, the environment we're in, the terrain. Strategy as working on the system rather than in the system is the second part. I'm going to suggest to you that strategy is a persistent pattern of behavior as opposed to tactics which aren't. And I'll give you some examples of those. And I'm going to suggest to you that strategy is fundamentally a process of learning. And then we'll have some conclusions and questions at the end. Now, if anybody's bored or wishes to rush away or had enough, now is the time to leave, because that was the 5-minute version. Darn, they're staying. Okay. So in essence, that's the story tonight. Now, I remember as a young management consultant in my days with Price Waterhouse about many years ago, I kept hearing this word strategy around the place. And I went, oh, that's interesting. What's really going on here? And what I realized very quickly was that you can strategically use strategy in any strategic sentence to give it any strategic meaning you strategically want it to strategically have. This is dangerous. There are lots of people out there who go around saying strategy, strategy, strategy at every chance they get. What they're doing is trying to sound important. So my first lesson to you is strategy is not a synonym for important. In fact, my first piece of advice to you, and most of you are in finance, so if you meet someone from sales and they go, I'm off to see a strategic customer, to have a strategic meeting about a strategic opportunity with a strategic product, ask them 1 or 2 things. Tell me, are you going to come up with a year's time with a 25% increase in revenue that's good margin, or are you merely talking up your expenses before you've actually even submitted them? So that's the question.